1981, Adam Rich stood at the pinnacle of the Disney empire, his perfect, flawless face chosen to represent the innocent childhood of Americans. 40 years later, that same face was found swollen and congested in a Los Angeles home, ruined by the very industry that had once glorified him as a king. The fentanyl overdose was not an isolated case. It was the expiration date of a product the Disney machine had manufactured, sold, and then abandoned. The distance from a movie poster to a corner slab is the true price of Hollywood fame. Disney sold us a dreamlike world through Adam's eyes, but left the man to face the pitch-black darkness on his own. When the cameras stopped rolling, the magic vanished into white dust, and the boy who had been taught to smile on command died in an attempt to alleviate the pain of an unending silence. How does a child built for universal adoration end up rotting in the stale silence of a Brentwood bathroom, extinguished by a counterfeit pill just miles from the sound stages that made him an icon? The answer lies not in the grim toxicology report of 2023, but in the blinding, artificial sunshine of the era that manufactured him. In the ecosystem of late 1970s television, the child star was not merely a performer. They were a national sedative. They served as the bridge between a cynical, post-Watergate public and the idealized domesticity the networks were selling. The industry required a specific raw material, children who could project an innocence so potent it felt radioactive. They needed to be readable, precocious enough to carry a scene, yet compliant enough to hit their marks. They were the human antidepressants for a bruised country. Adam Rich was dropped into a high-stakes industry that eats its young. Born on October 12, 1968 in Los Angeles, he did not just enter a city, he entered a marketplace. In this sprawling, smog-choked company town, the commodification of youth was as industrial as the assembly lines of Detroit. Here, a child was not a dependent, he was a potential lottery ticket. In an environment where every waiter was a screenwriter and every sunset was a backdrop, a cute child with expressive eyes is not just admired, he is appraised. Adam had the look, the kind of natural charisma that the camera falls in love with. He had enormous expressive eyes that seemed to hold a mixture of mischief and soulfulness. He had a smile that engaged his entire face. He had a natural energy that was frantic but charismatic. But biology is only the first hurdle. The industry required something more elusive, readability. A child's star must project everything. There is no room for a private inner world. When they are sad, they must project sadness instantly. When they are happy, the joy must register on the film stock without ambiguity. Most children are shy, reserved, or erratic. Adam Rich was a broadcaster. By the time he was toddling, the machinery began to encircle him. The process of turning a human child into a commercial asset is brutal, efficient, and deeply dehumanizing. It begins with the cattle calls. Hundreds of mothers gripping the hands of hundreds of sons crowd into waiting rooms that smell of stale coffee and anxiety. They hold headshots, glossy, retouched photographs that freeze their children in moments of artificial joy. The mothers are the managers, the drivers, the coaches, and the disciplinarians. The children are the livestock. They are inspected for teeth, for height, for skin clarity, and for that indefinable spark. Adam survived these calls. He didn't just survive them, he thrived in them. He had a peculiar, almost unnatural comfort with performance. While other children would freeze under the hot glare of studio lights or cry when separated from their mothers, Adam stepped onto the mark. He understood the game before he could read the rules. He learned that affection was transactional. If he smiled when the man with the clipboard asked him to smile, he received praise. If he cried on cue, he received candy or a toy. If he sat still and didn't disrupt the adults, he was good. This conditioning is dangerous. It rewires the developing brain. A normal child learns that they are loved simply for existing. A child actor learns that they are loved for performing. Their self-worth becomes tethered to their utility. Adam was learning, largely unconsciously, that his value lay in his ability to manipulate the emotions of strangers. He was becoming a professional pleaser. The feedback loop was instantaneous. A good audition meant ice cream and happy parents. A bad audition meant a silent car ride home and the palpable weight of disappointment filling the back seat. His early resume was a testament to his utility. He booked commercials. He landed small parts. He was reliable. In an industry where time is money, thousands of dollars a minute on a shooting schedule, a child who hits their mark and recites their line is worth their weight in platinum. Adam was a utility player, a tiny professional who treated a sound stage with the casual familiarity most kids reserve for a sandbox. He was building a reputation. Casting directors knew him. "Get the rich kid," they would say. "He doesn't look at the camera. He doesn't cry." But the stakes were about to escalate. In the mid-1970s, ABC was looking for a hit. The network landscape was changing. The era of the Western was dying. The era of the dramedy, the hour-long comedy drama, was dawning. They were developing a show based on the life of syndicated newspaper columnist Tom Braden, a man with 8 children. The show would be called 8 is Enough. The casting for the Bradford family was a military operation. They needed a distinct archetype for each child: the rebellious older son, the intellectual daughter, the sporty one. And they needed the anchor, the baby. The youngest child in a TV family serves a critical narrative function. They are the grounding rod. When the teenage storylines get too angsty or the adult storylines get too dry, the camera cuts to the youngest child for a reset. They provide the awe factor. They humanize the parents. They are the bridge to the audience's protective instincts. The role was Nicholas Bradford. The requirements were specific. He had to be cute, but not cloying. He had to be able to deliver a punchline, but also handle the emotional weight of a show that dealt with death and remarriage. Hundreds of boys were considered. The search was exhaustive. They needed a face that America would want to adopt. When Adam Rich walked into the audition room, the energy shifted. He didn't just read the lines, he inhabited the space. He had a bowl cut, a mop of thick, shiny hair that framed his face like a helmet. It gave him a distinctive silhouette. He looked like a beetle shrunken down to miniature size, but it was his demeanor that sealed the deal. He was fearless. He bantered with the producers. He looked them in the eye. He wasn't intimidated by the power dynamics of the room because he had spent his entire conscious life in rooms just like it. He secured the role. The contract was signed. The ink on the page legally bound a minor to a multi-year production schedule that would demand 10 to 12 hours of labor a day. The financial terms were lucrative, staggering sums for a working-class family, enough to alter the socio-economic trajectory of everyone with the last name Rich. But the contract didn't list the psychological cost. It didn't mention that by signing, Adam was effectively forfeiting his anonymity, his privacy, and his right to a normal development. Production began. The pilot was shot. The chemistry was instantaneous. Dick Van Patten, playing the patriarch Tom Bradford, took a shine to the boy. The other cast members, a mix of seasoned actors and newcomers, encircled him. He was the mascot of the set. But a mascot is not a peer. He was a child living in an adult world, surrounded by union crew members, lighting grips, and script supervisors. His vocabulary expanded to include terms like blocking, key light, and turnover. His playground was a maze of cables and fake walls. When 8 is Enough premiered in March 1977, the reaction was seismic. The show tapped into a vein of American longing. It offered a vision of a chaotic but loving meritocracy, where every problem could be solved with a conversation at the kitchen table. And at the center of it was Nicholas. Adam Rich became a star overnight. The fame of a child star in the late 70s was a physical force. It wasn't the digital fragmented fame of today. It was concentrated. There were only 3 major networks. If you were on a hit show on Tuesday night, half the country saw you. The next morning, every person you passed on the street knew your face. For a 9-year-old boy, this is a disorienting, hallucinogenic experience. Strangers grabbed him. Girls screamed. Adults asked for his autograph. The boundaries of his physical self were erased. He belonged to the public. The page boy haircut became a phenomenon. Mothers dragged their sons to barbershops demanding the Nicholas. Adam was no longer just a boy. He was a trend. He was a commodity. Merchandise deals were struck. His face appeared on lunchboxes, t-shirts, and posters. He was generating millions of dollars in revenue. He was the golden goose. Inside the bubble of success, the pressure began to mount. A child's brain is not designed to process global adoration. It creates a narcissism that is both grandiose and fragile. Adam began to believe the hype. How could he not? Every adult he encountered told him he was special. He was brilliant. He was the best. He was the center of the solar system. The normal checks and balances of childhood, the playground fights, the classroom failures, the anonymity, were removed. He was exempt from reality. His parents, tasked with the impossible job of managing a national asset who also happened to be their son, began to lose their grip. The power dynamic in the household shifted imperceptibly but fatally. When your 9-year-old son is paying the mortgage, paying for the cars, and funding the lifestyle of the entire family, you cannot send him to his room. You cannot enforce discipline. He holds the economic leverage. The child becomes the master. The parents become the employees. This inversion of the natural order sows the seeds of disaster. Adam was given a level of autonomy that he was developmentally incapable of handling. He was a prince, and the court bowed to him. On set, the work was grueling. The labor laws protecting children were looser then. He worked long hours. He was expected to be on at all times. If he was tired, if he was cranky, if he just wanted to play, the production ground to a halt. Thousands of dollars were lost. The pressure to perform was existential. He learned to suppress his own needs to service the machine. He learned to dissociate. He could turn the charm on like a light switch, leaving the real Adam somewhere in the dark, waiting. The immense success of 8 is Enough masked the rot growing underneath. The industry saw Adam as a win. He was delivering the ratings. He was selling the soap. He was the perfect investment. But nobody was checking the foundation. Nobody was asking what the cost of this artificial sunshine was doing to the soil of his psyche. They were strip mining his youth, extracting the charisma and the energy, unaware that they were creating a sinkhole that would eventually swallow him whole. As the late 70s bled into the early 80s, Adam Rich stood at the summit of the entertainment world. He was America's little brother. He was beloved. He was rich. He was famous. He was 10 years old. And he was standing on the edge of a cliff, blindfolded by the glare of the flashbulbs, waiting for the ground to disappear. The year 1981 marked the apex of the curve, the precise moment where the upward trajectory of Adam Rich's career stalled and began its long, terrifying descent. He was 12 years old, on the precipice of 13, standing at the center of the Disney empire. The studio, recognizing the potent marketability of America's little brother, cast him in a feature film designed to capitalize on his specific brand of innocence. The movie was The Devil and Max Devlin. The casting was a masterstroke of 1980s pop culture synergy. Adam was paired with Bill Cosby, a man who, at that time, occupied the cultural throne of America's dad. Cosby was the trusted pitchman for Jell-O and Coca-Cola, the unassailable moral authority of the entertainment world. To see Adam Rich, the perfect son, alongside Bill Cosby, the perfect father figure, was to witness the unification of two massive brands. The film's premise, viewed through the lens of Adam's future, is drenched in grim irony. It tells the story of a shady landlord who makes a pact with Satan to save his own soul by corrupting 3 innocent people. Adam played Toby Hart, one of the innocents targeted for corruption. The script required him to be the moral compass, the pure soul that the devil wanted to stain. On set, the dynamic was a continuation of the coddling Adam had received for years. He was top billing. He was the star. The production revolved around his school hours and his moods. This project was supposed to be his bridge. 8 is Enough had made him a television icon, but The Devil and Max Devlin was intended to mint him as a movie star, a transition that very few child actors successfully navigate. It was the test of his durability. Could the Nicholas Bradford charm survive on a 40-foot screen? The movie was released to moderate success, but it failed to ignite the cinematic explosion his handlers had anticipated. It didn't flop, but it didn't soar. It simply existed. And in Hollywood, mere existence is the first symptom of decline. The industry was beginning to shift. The sweet, cloying sentimentality of the 70s was giving way to the harder, cynical edge of the 80s. The audience's appetite for the cute kid was sating. They had consumed Adam Rich for 5 years. They were full. Simultaneously, the foundational pillar of his life collapsed. In 1981, ABC canceled 8 is Enough. The decision was not a result of a catastrophic ratings failure, but a cold calculation of rising production costs and aging storylines. The network looked at the ledger and decided the margins were no longer attractive. For the adult actors like Dick Van Patten or Betty Buckley, this was a professional setback, a signal to call their agents and look for the next gig. It was business. For Adam Rich, it was a fundamental severing of his reality. Since the age of 8, his entire world had been structured around the call sheet of the show. His social circle was the cast and crew. His father figure was Dick Van Patten. His sense of purpose was derived from the daily ritual of rehearsal and taping. The set was his school, his playground, and his home. When the show was canceled, that structure vanished overnight. The family he had grown up with was disbanded. The lights on the soundstage were turned off. The psychological impact of a long-running show's cancellation on a child is comparable to a sudden death in the family. The daily validation, the constant reinforcement of his importance, the camaraderie, it all stopped. He was sent home to the suburbs, to a regular house, to regular parents who had long since ceded their authority to him. He was a general returning from a war that everyone else had decided was over. He had no troops to command, no battles to fight, and no idea how to live in peacetime. Then came the biological betrayal. Nature is the natural predator of the child star, and it hunted Adam Rich with ruthless efficiency. As 1981 bled into 1982, Adam hit puberty. For a civilian teenager, puberty is a gauntlet of awkwardness and hormonal volatility. For a child actor whose entire net worth is tied to a specific frozen image of youth, puberty is a career-ending injury. The physical transformation was rapid and unforgiving. The round cherubic face that had sold millions of magazines began to lengthen. The button nose became prominent. The skin, once porcelain and camera-ready, erupted in teenage acne. The voice, a high, clear tenor that had delivered precocious punchlines with laser precision, cracked and dropped into an unstable baritone. Most devastating was the hair. The Adam Rich page boy, the bowl cut that had defined him, stopped working. On an 8-year-old, it was adorable. On a 14-year-old with a squaring jaw and a cracking voice, it looked ridiculous. It looked like a costume. He was trapped in the uncanny valley of casting. Too old to play the cute kid, too young and soft to play the rebellious teen or the romantic lead. He was stuck in the middle, and Hollywood has no scripts for the middle. The industry reacted with its characteristic coldness. The phone stopped ringing. It wasn't a gradual decline, it was a sudden silence. The agents who had once fought for his attention now had their assistants take his calls. The casting directors who had greeted him with hugs and candy now looked at his resume with polite indifference. They didn't see Adam Rich, the talented veteran. They saw Nicholas Bradford trying to be a man. They couldn't unsee the character. The brand was too strong. He was typecast into oblivion. He went to auditions. He stood in waiting rooms filled with unknown teenagers who were hungry, fresh, and cheap. He was none of those things. He was expensive, he was known, and he was stale. He would read for parts, and he could see the rejection in the producer's eyes before he even finished the scene. They were looking for the next Adam Rich, not the current one. This rejection is a specific type of trauma. It is not just a professional failure. It is a personal invalidation. Adam had been trained to believe that his self-worth was directly correlated to his ability to book a job. When the job stopped, the logic of his upbringing dictated that his worth had evaporated. He wasn't failing to act, he was failing to be. In a rational world, this would have been the moment for a course correction. This was the moment for the adults in his life, his parents, his managers, his guardians, to intervene. They should have looked at the changing landscape, accepted that the golden boy era was over, and pivoted toward normalcy. They should have reintegrated him into the school system, encouraged him to make friends his own age, and helped him build an identity separate from his fame. Instead, they committed the ultimate betrayal. By 1986, the struggle to maintain a normal life collapsed. Just months shy of graduation, Adam Rich dropped out of Chatsworth High School. He was 17, educated on a soundstage, and entirely unprepared for the real world. The decision is breathtaking in its negligence. A 14-year-old boy, adrift in Los Angeles with no job prospects and a crumbling sense of self, was allowed to terminate his education. The justification was likely financial. School was seen as an impediment to his availability for work. If a role came up, he needed to be free to take it. The possibility of a future job outweighed the certainty of his present development. His parents, accustomed to the lifestyle his income provided, were unable or unwilling to enforce the boundaries of a normal childhood. They had become dependent on the industry just as much as he had. To force him into high school would be to admit that the ride was over, to admit that the money tap had been turned off. It was easier to keep him available, to keep the dream on life support, than to face the harsh reality of a post-stardom life. So Adam Rich became a 14-year-old retiree. He had a bank account filled with the residuals of his childhood labor, a driver's license, or access to drivers, and absolutely nowhere to be. He had no homeroom, no football practice, no prom, no math tests. He had 24 hours a day of unstructured time to fill. He remained in the San Fernando Valley, the sprawling sun-baked grid of suburbs that serves as the bedroom community for the entertainment industry. It is a place of strip malls, wide boulevards, and relentless heat. For a teenager with money and no purpose, it is a dangerous playground. Adam began to try to fill the silence. The adrenaline of the set, the action, the applause, the laughter, was a drug he had been weaned on since toddlerhood. Without it, life felt flat. It felt gray. He needed to manufacture a new high. He found it in the nascent drug culture of 1980s Los Angeles. It started innocuously enough with marijuana. It was 1983. Pot was ubiquitous. For Adam, it wasn't just about rebellion. It was about medication. The marijuana softened the edges of his anxiety. It quieted the voice in his head that asked why nobody wanted him anymore. It made the long, empty afternoons in the valley tolerable. But marijuana is a mild sedative for a problem that was metastasizing. Adam was dealing with a profound loss of identity. He was the kid from 8 is Enough to everyone he met, but he didn't know who he was to himself. He was a celebrity without a stage. Strangers would stop him in the mall, point at his face, and ask, "Whatever happened to you?" They spoke of him in the past tense while he was standing right in front of them. Every interaction was a reminder of his expiration date. He began to drift away from the few peers he had. Normal teenagers were worrying about grades and dates. Adam was worrying about his legacy and his relevance. He gravitated toward an older crowd, the hangers-on, and the driftwood of the Hollywood fringe. These were people who were impressed by his fame, or at least by his ability to pick up the check. They didn't challenge him. They didn't ask him to grow up. They just wanted to party with Nicholas Bradford. By 1984, marijuana was no longer enough. Cocaine took over, providing the artificial confidence he desperately craved. It made him feel like the golden boy again, replacing insecurity with chemical grandeur. But as the highs faded, the isolation of the San Fernando Valley deepened. He wasn't just losing his career, he was losing himself, drifting from the industry's spotlight into a dark, paranoid existence funded by dwindling residuals. By 1985, the geography of Adam Rich's life had shrunk. The expansive world of studio lots, press junkets, and national tours had contracted to the interior of cars, the back rooms of clubs, and the darkened living rooms of the San Fernando Valley. The golden boy of ABC was 17 years old, and he was disappearing. He was vanishing into the white noise of a chemical dependency that was no longer recreational. It was structural. The foundation of his daily existence was shifting from the external validation of an audience to the internal regulation of dopamine through synthetic means. The transition from marijuana to cocaine in the mid-1980s was not unique to Adam. It was the cultural ambient radiation of Los Angeles at the time. But for a discarded child star, cocaine was not a party drug. It was a replacement therapy. The physiological effect of the drug, the surge of confidence, the feeling of invincibility, the hyper-focus, mimicked the adrenaline of a live performance. When Adam was high, the silence of the telephone didn't matter. The rejection of the casting directors didn't matter. The crushing reality that he was a has-been before he could legally vote was suspended. In the grip of the high, he was Nicholas Bradford again, charming, central, and important. This is the phenomenon of the phantom limb applied to celebrity. When a person loses an arm, the brain continues to map the limb, sending signals to a hand that is no longer there, resulting in excruciating pain or itching in empty space. Adam had lost his fame, a massive defining appendage of his identity, but his brain was still wired for it. He craved the stimulus. The drug filled the void where the applause used to be. It was a chemical ovation. He drifted away from the few remaining peers who might have anchored him to reality. The other child actors of his generation were splitting into two camps: those who were successfully transitioning into normal lives or adult careers, and those who were sinking. Adam gravitated toward the sinkers, and worse, toward the parasites. His social circle filled with people who were not his friends. They were proximity associates. They were older dealers, hangers-on, and people fascinated by the novelty of getting high. With the kid from 8 is enough. These associates did not challenge him. They did not ask him about his education, which had completely ceased. They did not ask him about his future. They only cared about his credit card and his access. Adam, starved for connection and lacking the social skills to discern genuine friendship from exploitation, paid the tab. He bought the drugs. He bought the illusion of camaraderie. He was purchasing a distorted version of the family dynamic he had lost when the show was canceled. He was the provider again, the center of attention, buying loyalty with the dwindling reserves of his childhood labor. The physical toll of this lifestyle began to manifest with brutal speed. The cute aesthetic that had been his trademark was eroding. His face, once round and bright, began to hollow out. His skin sallowed. The bright, intelligent eyes that had captivated millions became glassy and pinned. He stopped grooming himself with the meticulous care of a professional actor. He grew his hair out, not in a style, but in neglect. He ceased to be the little brother. He was becoming a wraith. As the 1980s wore on, the substance abuse hardened. Cocaine, expensive and glamorous, gave way to methamphetamine. This shift is critical. It marks the descent from the Hollywood party scene to the gritty, desperate underbelly of addiction. Meth is not a social lubricant. It is a drug of isolation and paranoia. It strips away the veneer of functionality. It keeps the user awake for days, dismantling the mind through sleep deprivation and chemical imbalance. Adam began to live nocturnally. He spent days behind drawn blinds in apartments in the valley, vibrating with nervous energy, taking apart electronics, or obsessing over minutia, avoiding the sunlight that felt accusatory. The shame was a physical weight. In his lucid moments, the contrast between who he was, a junkie in a dirty room, and who he was supposed to be, America's sweetheart, was unbearable. He hated Nicholas Bradford. He hated the boy on the lunchbox. That boy was a lie that the man couldn't live up to. He tried to work. He went to auditions in this condition, which only accelerated his professional demise. A casting director would see a twitchy, gaunt young man with bad skin and erratic focus. The readability that made him a star was still there, but now it was broadcasting desperation. He wasn't acting, he was leaking. The rejection became a self-fulfilling prophecy. He would use to numb the pain of rejection, which would make him unhireable, which would lead to more rejection. By 1988, Adam Rich was 20 years old. He had been an addict for a third of his life. The fortune he had amassed, the money that was supposed to set him up for life, was hemorrhaging. Addiction is an expensive tenant. Between the cost of the drugs, the cost of the lifestyle, and the mismanagement of his finances by people who claimed to be helping him, the bottom line was turning red. The security was evaporating. He began to have run-ins with the law, traffic stops, possession charges, minor infractions that were kept relatively quiet, buried in the back pages or settled before they hit the headlines. The Golden Boy shield still offered a sliver of protection. Police officers would pull him over, recognize the face, feel a pang of pity or nostalgia, and let him go with a warning. Get home safe, Nicholas. This leniency was not a kindness. It was an enablement. It delayed the inevitable crash. He moved from apartment to apartment, his living situation becoming increasingly transient. He lost the ability to maintain a household. The discipline required to pay bills, clean a kitchen, or buy groceries was gone, replaced by the singular biological imperative of the addict: find the next fix. He was living moment to moment a feral existence masked by the remnants of his celebrity. The isolation was total. He wasn't just isolated from the industry, he was isolated from reality. He had no frame of reference for how to be a struggling adult. He had never flipped a burger. He had never filed a tax return. He had never had a job interview that didn't involve a script. He was an alien in the working world. The skills he had mastered, hitting a mark, memorizing a line, crying on cue, were useless currency in the economy of survival. As the decade closed, the isolation around him became suffocating. The 1980s were booming. The economy was roaring. Pop culture was exploding with new stars, new icons, new cute kids. Full House had premiered, and the Olsen twins were taking his place in the cultural psyche. Adam watched this from the sidelines, a ghost haunting the industry that had replaced him. He saw the machine doing to them exactly what it had done to him, but he had no voice to warn them. He was just a cautionary tale that nobody was reading. By 1990, the situation was critical. The money was effectively gone. The drugs had ravaged his health. The psychological barrier between Adam Rich actor and Adam Rich addict had dissolved. He was in pain, chronic physical and emotional pain. The drugs were no longer working to get him high. They were barely keeping him functional. He needed more. He needed stronger. The desperation was building a pressure cooker inside his chest. He was 22 years old. He looked 30. He felt 80. The boy who had charmed Bill Cosby and captured the heart of the nation was dead, buried under layers of toxicity and neglect. What remained was a young man in agonizing withdrawal, standing on the edge of a violent act that would finally shatter the silence he had been living in for a decade. He was about to pick up a tire iron and introduce the world to the monster the industry had created. The pressure that had been building inside Adam Rich throughout the late 1980s finally detonated on April 6, 1991. The location was West Hills, a quiet, affluent neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley just miles from where he had grown up as a national icon. The target was a pharmacy. This specific choice of target is the most telling piece of evidence regarding his mental state. A career criminal breaks into a home for jewelry or a liquor store for cash. A desperate addict breaks into a pharmacy for relief. Adam was not looking for money to buy a sports car or fund a lavish lifestyle. He was in physical agony. His body, dependent on opiates and sedatives for years, was screaming. The withdrawal symptoms, the bone-deep aches, the fever sweats, the crawling skin, the terror had stripped him of all rationality. He needed to stop the pain. It was late at night. Adam drove to the West Hills Regional Medical Center. He did not have a sophisticated plan. He did not have a lookout. He had a tire iron and a singular blinding need. He approached the glass doors of the pharmacy. He swung the iron. The sound of shattering glass in a quiet suburban medical park is violent and distinct. It is the sound of a life breaking. Adam stepped through the broken window. He didn't go for the register. He went for the shelves. He was looking for specific pharmaceuticals, painkillers, sedatives, anything to quiet the noise in his nervous system. He grabbed what he could. It was a clumsy, frantic smash-and-grab job. He wasn't a cat burglar. He was a sick man flailing in the dark. The police response was immediate. In West Hills, a smashed window triggers a swarm. Officers arrived while he was still on the premises or fleeing nearby. There was no high-speed chase. There was no standoff. Adam was arrested with the stolen drugs in his possession. He was handcuffed, read his rights, and shoved into the back of a squad car. The booking process at the Los Angeles Police Department is a grim industrial procedure designed to strip a person of their individuality. For Adam Rich, this process was a grotesque inversion of the makeup chair. Instead of a stylist adjusting his hair, an officer grabbed his head to take a mugshot. Instead of signing autographs, he was rolling his fingers in black ink for prints. He was stripped of his clothes, his dignity, and his name. He was now booking number 12,345, a placeholder for the reality of his inmate status. The mugshot taken that night is one of the most haunting images in the history of child stardom. It destroyed the memory of Nicholas Bradford in a single shutter click. The face staring back at the camera was bloated and pale. The hair was messy and thinning. The eyes, once bright and mischievous, were dead, flat black pools of exhaustion and defeat. He looked decades older than his 22 years. He looked like a man who had been fighting a losing war for a very long time. When the news broke the next morning, the media ecosystem went nuclear. This was not a minor traffic violation. This was a felony burglary committed by America's little brother. The tabloids, which were just beginning their rise to dominance in the early 90s, feasted. The headlines were brutal. 8 is enough star busted. Nicholas Bradford, junkie burglar. The public reaction was a mix of shock and a dark voyeuristic satisfaction. There's a cruel mechanism in celebrity culture called schadenfreude, taking pleasure in the misfortune of others. Seeing the golden boy fall so hard validated the cynicism of the public. It proved that the perfect families on TV were lies. It proved that fame was toxic. People clucked their tongues and shook their heads, but they bought the papers. They consumed his tragedy as eagerly as they had consumed his comedy. Adam sat in a jail cell, facing the reality of the situation. He was broke. He had burned bridges with almost everyone in his life. He needed bail money. He needed a lawyer. He needed help. In a twist that would be dismissed as bad writing if it appeared in a script, the person who came to his rescue was not a blood relative. It was not a biological parent. It was his television father. Dick Van Patten, the actor who played Tom Bradford, the patriarch of 8 is Enough, heard the news. Van Patten was a man of genuine warmth and integrity, one of the few adults in the industry who viewed the child actors not as colleagues, but as extended family. When he saw the mugshot, he didn't see a criminal. He saw the little boy who used to sit on his lap between takes. He saw a kid who was drowning. Van Patten drove to the station. He posted the bail. The symbolism of this act is crushing. The biological family, paralyzed by years of dysfunction and financial dependence on Adam, was absent from the narrative of his rescue. The artificial family, the one created by a casting director and a contract, proved to be the real one. The lines between reality and fiction blurred completely. Adam was being saved by Dad, but Dad was an actor. This reinforcement of the TV dynamic likely confused Adam even further. The only place he found unconditional love was within the context of the show that had ended a decade ago. Van Patten didn't just pay the bail, he publicly supported Adam. He stood before the press and pleaded for compassion. He spoke of Adam's addiction as a disease, not a moral failing. He tried to shield the boy from the worst of the media glare, but the legal system is a machine, and it had to run its course. Adam was charged with felony burglary. The prosecutors were not looking to make an example of him, but they couldn't ignore the crime. A pharmacy break-in is a serious offense. It involves controlled substances and property damage. Adam was facing potential prison time. However, the celebrity justice system of Los Angeles began to turn its gears. Judges and prosecutors in LA are accustomed to fallen stars. They often opt for rehabilitation over incarceration, especially for first-time felony offenders. with clear substance abuse issues. Adam's lawyer argued that he needed treatment, not a cage. The judge agreed. Adam entered a plea deal. He pleaded no contest. He was given 5 years of probation and ordered to enter a residential drug treatment program. He avoided state prison, but he was now a convicted felon. The Golden Boy label was legally and permanently replaced by convict. He checked into a rehab facility. This began the revolving door phase of his life. Rehab is difficult for anyone, but for a former child star, it presents unique pathological hurdles. In group therapy, patients are asked to be vulnerable, to strip away their egos, and to confront their trauma. But Adam's trauma was his fame. His ego was his only defense mechanism. When he walked into a group session, the other patients knew who he was. They stared, they whispered, "That's the kid from TV." He couldn't be just another addict trying to get clean. He was a curiosity. This dynamic made true recovery incredibly difficult. He would isolate himself, or he would perform for the other patients using humor and charm to deflect from his pain, the exact survival skills he learned on set. The treatment center doctors diagnosed the obvious: severe addiction to prescription painkillers and alcohol. But the underlying diagnosis was more complex. It was a profound case of arrested development. Adam had never learned to self-soothe. He had never learned to handle disappointment. He had the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old in the body of a ravaged 22-year-old. When the world got hard, his instinct was to check out, to numb, to escape. He spent months in treatment. He detoxed. The physical withdrawal was hellish, but the psychological withdrawal was worse. Without the drugs, the silence returned. The reality of his life crashed down on him. He was a felon. He was uneducated. He was unemployed. He was the punchline of late-night talk show jokes. He emerged from rehab in late 1991, physically clean but spiritually raw. He tried to restart his life. He gave interviews expressing remorse and a desire to get back to acting. "I messed up," he told reporters. "I'm ready to work." But Hollywood is unforgiving of liability. A production requires insurance. A bond company will not insure an actor with a recent felony burglary conviction and a known history of hard drug abuse. He was uninsurable. That meant he was unemployable. The door to his old life was not just closed, it was bricked over. He was forced to confront the civilian world again, but now with a criminal record. If it was hard to get a job as a gardener or a cook before, it was nearly impossible now. He was trapped in a limbo of notoriety. He was too famous to be anonymous, too infamous to be respected, and too broke to hide. He was no longer Adam Rich. He was now part of a grim trilogy: Dana Plato, Todd Bridges, and Adam Rich. The sitcom curse became a media obsession, and Adam was cast as its latest victim. The public lumped them together. The curse of the sitcom kids. This labeling had a pernicious effect. It made failure feel like destiny. Adam began to internalize the idea that he was cursed. He wasn't just a guy who made bad choices. He was the victim of a cosmic joke. This fatalism is dangerous for an addict. If you believe you are doomed, there is no point in fighting the urge to use. Throughout 1992 and 1993, Adam oscillated between sobriety and relapse. He would stay clean for a few months, attend AA meetings, and try to live quietly. Then the pressure would build, the boredom, the shame, the lack of purpose, and he would slip. A drink here, a pill there, and the cycle would restart. The relationship with his real family remained fractured. They loved him, certainly, but the damage done in the formative years was calcified. They didn't know how to parent him as a struggling adult any better than they knew how to parent him as a star. The interactions were fraught with guilt and resentment. Adam blamed them for not protecting him. They blamed him for squandering his potential. It was a deadlock of pain. Dick Van Patten remained a constant. He invited Adam to family dinners. He checked in. He tried to offer the stability that Adam craved. But a mentor cannot save a man from himself. Van Patten could pay the bail, but he couldn't live Adam's life for him. By the mid-90s, the desperation was mutating. Adam was no longer the shocking headline. He was old news. The paparazzi stopped following him. The tabloids found new victims. He was sliding into irrelevance, which, for a narcissist, even a reluctant one, is a fate worse than infamy. He missed the attention. Even the negative attention of the arrest was better than the invisibility of his current life. This psychological state sets the stage for the most bizarre and pathetic chapter of his life. Adam was about to engage in a piece of performance art so misguided, so desperate, that it would permanently alienate him from the few people who still had sympathy for him. He was about to try to reclaim his fame by destroying himself, not literally, but narratively. He was about to kill Nicholas Bradford to see if anyone would cry. The silence of the mid-1990s was different from the silence of the early 80s. In the 80s, the silence was the result of the phone not ringing. In the 90s, the silence was the sound of the world actively looking away. Adam Rich was no longer a subject of curiosity. He was a relic, a cultural footnote referenced only in Where Are They Now segments or ironic trivia nights. He was 27 years old, an age when most actors are hitting their stride, yet he was effectively retired, unemployable, and carrying the heavy baggage of a felony record. The desperation to be seen, to be acknowledged as something other than a punchline, festered. This desperation found a conduit in the burgeoning counterculture scene of San Francisco. In 1996, a satirical magazine called Might, founded by a then unknown Dave Eggers, was looking to make a statement about the media's obsession with celebrity tragedy. The 90s were a decade fixated on the destruction of icons. River Phoenix, Kurt Cobain, the O.J. Simpson trial. Death sold magazines. Tragedy moved units. The editors of Might conceived a dark social experiment. They would kill a celebrity in print. They wanted to publish a detailed eulogistic account of a famous person's death to expose the superficiality of public grief. They needed a subject. They needed someone famous enough to be recognized, but obscure enough that their death wouldn't trigger an immediate global news alert that would debunk the story in minutes. They needed a has-been. They found Adam Rich. Adam's participation in this hoax is the critical psychological pivot point of his adult life. He didn't just sign off on it. He collaborated. He gave the editors permission to murder him. This decision speaks volumes about his state of mind. It was a form of suicide proxy. He couldn't kill himself. Perhaps he lacked the will, or perhaps he still held out hope for a future. But he could kill Nicholas Bradford. He could watch his own funeral. He could read his own obituaries. It was a narcissist's ultimate fantasy and a depressive's ultimate test. Will they miss me? The resulting article, published in Might magazine under the title The Assassination of Adam Rich, was a masterpiece of fabrication. It detailed a grim, violent end that felt disturbingly plausible, given Adam's trajectory. The story claimed that Adam had been stabbed to death in the parking lot of a Los Angeles nightclub during a robbery gone wrong. It painted a picture of a random, senseless act of violence ending a troubled life. The article was written with a somber, respectful tone, complete with fake quotes from friends and industry insiders mourning the loss of a sweet but lost soul. When the magazine hit the stands, the reaction was immediate and confused. The internet was in its infancy. Fact-checking was not instantaneous. Rumors spread through the lower tiers of the entertainment industry. Did you hear about the rich kid? He got stabbed. For a brief window of time, the world believed Adam Rich was dead. Adam watched the reaction. He likely scanned the newspapers and listened to the radio, waiting for the outpouring of love. He wanted the validation that he had been denied for 15 years. He wanted to hear the world say, "We loved him. He was special." But the reaction was not the tidal wave of grief he had anticipated. It was a ripple. There were brief mentions. There were shrugs. "That's sad," people said. And then they turned the page. The tragedy of his fictional death was that it wasn't surprising. It fit the narrative arc the public had already written for him. Child star, drugs, burglary, violent death. It was the expected conclusion. The public didn't mourn a great loss. They acknowledged a completed pattern. Then came the reveal. The magazine and Adam himself announced that it was all a joke, a satire, a commentary on media exploitation. "I'm alive," Adam declared, expecting to be hailed as a brilliant performance artist who had tricked the system. The backlash was vitriolic. The public does not like to be made a fool of, especially regarding death. The stunt didn't come across as clever social commentary. It came across as a desperate, morbid cry for attention from a washed-up junkie. It was viewed as an insult to the families of people who had actually died violent deaths. It was seen as a waste of resources. Industry insiders were appalled. Casting directors and producers, the gatekeepers Adam desperately needed to win back, looked at the stunt with disgust. It confirmed everything they feared about him. He was unstable, he was manipulative, and he was unprofessional. Who would insure a movie set with an actor who fakes his own death for a laugh? The hoax drove the final nail into the coffin of his acting career. If the pharmacy burglary made him uninsurable, the death hoax made him untouchable. Adam attempted to defend the stunt in interviews, but his explanations rang hollow. He sounded defensive and bitter. He claimed he wanted to show how the media feeds on tragedy, but the subtext was screamingly obvious. "I wanted you to look at me." The stunt stripped away the last vestiges of sympathy the public held for him. Before, he was a tragic figure, a victim of the machine. Now, he was a nuisance. The hoax didn't just fail, it erased him. If the pharmacy burglary had made him uninsurable, the staged death made him irrelevant. The years that followed dissolved into a gray blur of anonymity. While the world rushed into the digital age of the new millennium, Adam remained trapped in the analog static of his past. He retreated from the glare, not into peace, but into a quiet, grinding stasis that would consume his 30s and 40s. He stopped giving interviews. He stopped trying to be an actor. He accepted finally that the door was closed. He moved into smaller apartments, further away from the industry centers. He drifted into the anonymity of the Los Angeles sprawl. His substance abuse, which had oscillated during the early 90s, became his primary occupation again. Drugs are a reliable partner for the lonely. They don't judge, they don't ask about your resume, they don't care about your failed publicity stunts. They offer a consistent transactional relief. Adam returned to the numbness of opiates and the jagged energy of stimulants. He wasn't partying anymore. He was maintaining. He became a regular in the darker corners of the LA recovery and relapse circuit. He would get clean for a few months, find a sponsor, get a badge, and then the crushing weight of his reality would bring him down. He had no career to return to. He had no family of his own, no wife, no children. He had missed the developmental window to build those things. While his peers were raising families and building 401ks, Adam was still trying to figure out how to get through a Tuesday without getting high. Occasionally he would surface, a DUI arrest, rumors of a hospital stay, but mostly he was invisible. The late 90s and early 2000s were a time of rapid technological and cultural change, and Adam was left behind. The rise of the internet, reality TV, and social media created a new ecosystem of fame that he didn't understand and couldn't participate in. He was an analog star in a digital world. Dick Van Patten continued to be a lifeline, albeit a fraying one. The older actor never gave up on his TV son, but he was aging too. The 8 is Enough cast would occasionally reunite for specials or interviews, and Adam would be there looking older, rougher, his smile a little tighter. In these appearances, you could see the effort it took for him to put on the Nicholas mask. He would joke, he would reminisce, but his eyes remained flat. He was performing a cover version of himself. In 2002, he was arrested for driving under the influence. He nearly hit a police car on a closed freeway lane. It was sloppy, dangerous, and pathetic. It barely made the news. The headline was small. Former child star arrested for DUI. It was filler content. The shock value was gone. The tragedy had become mundane. Adam Rich entered his 30s, then his 40s in this stasis. He lived a small life. He had friends, people who knew him as Adam, not Nicholas, but they were few. He was described by neighbors as a quiet guy, a guy who kept to himself, who smoked cigarettes on his porch and looked tired. He wasn't the monster the media had briefly painted him as in 1991. He was just a damaged man trying to survive the wreckage of his own history. He grappled with chronic pain, a relentless physical legacy of his addiction, and the invisible scars of his past. This pain kept him tethered to the very opioids that had destroyed his career. The opioid crisis was beginning to sweep across America, and Adam was a prime candidate for its grasp. Doctors prescribed pills. Street dealers provided the rest. The cycle of dependency was the rhythm of his existence. He watched from a distance as a new generation of child stars went through the grinder. Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan. He saw the paparazzi swarming them, the internet tearing them apart. He saw the machine operating with even more ruthlessness than it had with him. He occasionally posted on social media, when that became a thing, offering support or cryptic warnings. "They don't care about you," he would write. "Get out while you can." He was the old soldier watching the new recruits march into the meat grinder, knowing he couldn't stop them. The death hoax of 1996 had been a failed attempt to control his narrative. In the end, it only proved that he had no control. The narrative belonged to the public, and the public had decided that Adam Rich was a tragedy. He lived the next 20 years, fulfilling that expectation, fading slowly, pixel by pixel, until he was just a man in a room in Brentwood, waiting for the silence to become permanent. By the time the new millennium stabilized, Adam Rich had settled into a routine of invisibility that lasted for nearly 2 decades. The frantic energy of his 20s, the pharmacy break-ins, the arrests, the desperate publicity stunts, had burned itself out. What replaced it was a low-level, grinding survival Farid's mode. He was a man in his 40s, then his 50s, living in a city that demands success yet possessing none of the markers of it. The entertainment industry had evolved into a digital beast. The rise of TMZ and the 24-hour celebrity news cycle in the mid-2000s created a new kind of economy for fallen stars. Reality television offered a potential lifeline. Shows like Celebrity Rehab or The Surreal Life were recruiting former icons to perform their dysfunction for a new generation. Adam was a prime candidate for this circuit. He fit the profile perfectly. Nostalgic value, history of addiction, tragic narrative. It would have been a paycheck. It would have been attention. Aside from a brief, self-deprecating cameo in the 2003 comedy Dickie Roberts' former child star, Adam largely refused to take the bait. He declined to become a caricature on the reality TV circuit, choosing poverty and obscurity over monetizing his trauma for a new generation. This decision is significant. It suggests a man who, despite his demons, retained a shred of dignity or perhaps a deep-seated exhaustion with being a spectacle. He had learned the hard way that the camera doesn't heal, it exploits. He stayed in his apartment. He kept his circle small. He lived on the residuals that had trickled down to pennies and whatever support he could piece together. His primary battlefront shifted from the legal system to the medical system. Years of hard drug abuse, cocaine in the 80s, alcohol and pills in the 90s had ravaged his physiology. He wasn't just fighting the urge to get high, he was fighting a body that was breaking down. He suffered from chronic pain, a common legacy for long-term addicts. The pain is not just a withdrawal symptom, it is structural damage to the nervous system and the bones. To manage this, he entered the labyrinth of pain management. This brought him face to face with the modern opioid crisis. In the 2010s, the landscape of addiction in America changed. It wasn't about shady deals in back alleys anymore. It was about pill mills and prescriptions. Adam became a patient. He was prescribed opioids to manage his physical ailments. For a recovering addict, a prescription bottle is a loaded gun. The line between pain management and relapse is invisible. He walked this line every day for years, often stumbling. The isolation of this period was punctuated by a singular, devastating loss. In June 2015, Dick Van Patten died at the age of 86. The death of Van Patten severed Adam's last tether to his golden era. Van Patten had been more than a co-star. He was the only consistent father figure Adam had known. He was the man who paid the bail. He was the man who never judged. When Van Patten died, the 8 is enough. Family grieved, and Adam was left unmoored. The protector was gone. The man who remembered Adam as a good kid and not just a junkie was no longer there to validate him. Adam's reaction to the death was quiet. He didn't make a scene. He expressed his love for TV Dad on social media, a platform he used sporadically. His Twitter account from this era offers a rare, unfiltered glimpse into his mind. He didn't use it to promote projects because there were no projects. He used it to shout into the void. His tweets were often lucid, intelligent, and deeply sad. He engaged with fans who remembered him, usually with kindness. He spoke out about mental health. In September 2022, just months before his death, he tweeted, "Human beings were not built to endure celebrity. We are built to be part of a tribe, not the object of a tribe's obsession." It was a thesis statement for his entire life, typed out on a smartphone in a lonely room in Los Angeles. It showed that he understood exactly what had happened to him. He wasn't confused. He knew he was a malfunction of the human condition caused by fame. But insight does not equal a cure. Knowing the machine broke you doesn't fix the gears. As the 2020s approached, the world entered the COVID-19 pandemic. For a man already prone to isolation, the lockdowns were a catastrophe. The few social outlets he had, a coffee shop, a meeting, a dinner with a friend, were shut down. The world contracted to the four walls of his home. Isolation is the incubator of addiction. Without external checks and balances, without the need to be somewhere or see someone, the guardrails fall away. Adam's health deteriorated. He was entering his mid-50s, a dangerous age for men with a history of substance abuse. The body loses its resilience. The liver, the heart, the lungs, they carry the score of every binge from 1985 onwards. He was living in Brentwood, a nice neighborhood, but his existence was modest. He wasn't living in a mansion, he was getting by. Neighbors described him as a ghost, a guy you might see checking the mail, looking disheveled, looking old. They didn't see Nicholas Bradford. They saw a frail man who walked with the heaviness of someone carrying too much past. By late 2022, The drug of choice on the streets and in the supply chain had shifted again. Fentanyl had arrived. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid 50 times stronger than heroin. It is a game changer in the world of addiction because it allows for no margin of error. A user can misjudge a dose of heroin and survive. A user cannot misjudge fentanyl. It is a binary drug. It gets you high or it kills you. It is unclear if Adam sought out fentanyl specifically, or if he bought what he thought were painkillers that were laced with a synthetic. This is the iron law of prohibition in effect. As enforcement gets tougher, the drugs get more potent and more dangerous. Adam Rich, a man who had survived the cocaine wars of the 80s and the prescription pill mills of the 2000s, was now navigating a minefield where a single pill could stop his heart. The days leading up to January 7th, 2023 were unremarkable. There was no dramatic spiral reported, no public breakdown. He was just living his life, managing his pain, managing his boredom. He was active on Twitter. He was texting friends. He was planning to do things. This is the cruelty of accidental overdose. It interrupts the mundane. It isn't a planned exit. It's a sudden stop. On the night of his death, Adam likely took a dose of what he believed was his medicine or his relief. He was in his bathroom. This detail is grim but common. The bathroom is the sanctuary of the addict, the place of privacy, the place of ritual. The fentanyl entered his system. The chemistry is brutal and fast. It simply commanded his body to shut down, extinguishing the breath from his lungs with a terrifying efficiency. It creates a warm, enveloping darkness. The panic of the last 40 years, the fear of rejection, the shame of the arrest, the grief for Van Patten, the phantom pain of the lost career would have dissolved into a final heavy silence. He fell. He did not get up. The house sat quiet. The phone may have buzzed with a text message that went unread. The sun rose over Brentwood, illuminating the manicured lawns and the expensive cars. But inside Adam's home, time had stopped. He lay there for days. This is the final metric of his isolation. When a person with a robust social network misses a lunch date or doesn't answer a call, the alarm is raised within hours. When a disposable child star goes silent, the world assumes he is just being reclusive again. It assumes he is sleeping it off. The buffer of neglect that had surrounded him for decades now shrouded his corpse. On January 7th, the silence was finally broken, not by applause, but by the routine knock of a welfare check. The world outside had kept spinning, but inside, the golden boy had finally found the rest that eluded him for decades.